Good evening. The recess is over and we're back for the Committee of the Whole meeting for June the 3rd. I see we have still got quorum. No one has left to watch the hockey game. After viewing the agenda, is there any move to change it or not? Everyone happy? Okay, so then, I'll find my glasses. Adoption of agenda, that the agenda for the June 3rd, 2019 regular meeting of committee be adopted as circulated. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Resolution. And disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof. I have already declared mine for number 18 on the agenda that we go back to after this one. Does anyone, after viewing the agenda, have any pecuniary interest for the Committee of the Whole meeting? Seeing none, we will direct the clerk that there was none. Okay, and so we start off with department reports. We have here a resolution from Councillor Wink, Community Planning and Development Monthly Report. The Committee of the Whole received the Community Planning and Development May 2019 report for information. Discussion on this report from anyone? Councillor Corr.
Yes, in the presentation it has more homes, more choices. And reading it through, they were talking about basement apartments. How is that going to affect our community, and are we going to go towards that in another 2 years, having all these basement apartments in Fonthill and Fenwick, pardon me?
Director of Planning.
Mr. Mayor, through you, that more houses, more homes, more choice is a strategy that was released by the provincial government on May 2nd. Certainly basement apartments or second dwellings are a critical piece to their platform and their strategy for increasing housing supply and housing choice and affordable housing. So going forward, when we are updating our official plan amendment and updating our zoning bylaw, we would have to provide for policies and regulations in our zoning bylaw for second dwelling units.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. In existing homes today?
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, it could be in existing homes as well. They would have to meet certainly building code and fire code requirements and with respect to life safety. And then they would have to meet potentially other performance standards that we would put into a bylaw, such as parking requirements and so forth. So, but the goal of the province is to provide for the option of having second dwelling units. It's not that every house will, but they want to provide for that option to increase opportunities for affordable housing.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, so could there be a possibility of someone buying a single dwelling home and converting it into 3 small apartments? One on the basement, one on the main floor, and one upstairs, is with this new regulation?
Mr. Mayor, through you, again, that would be something that would have to be addressed through the zoning bylaw. A second dwelling unit is primarily what they're focusing, but the ability to convert an existing dwelling to a triplex or a fourplex, if you had zoning that allowed for that, then yes, that conversion could happen. Again, if they met other performance requirements in the zoning bylaw, such as minimum unit size and parking requirements and so forth.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'll let my colleague ask a question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through the planning director, are we able to enforce that if they do this, that the new building code and the new fire code would take effect for the whole dwelling, not just for the new little addition they're going to do?
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, it would have to comply for that dwelling unit. You'd need to have fire separation between the units. If they aren't doing any development within the existing, dwelling, there would be no need to, upgrade within the existing dwelling, but it would be ensuring that you've got proper accesses to the new dwelling. You meet those life safety requirements in terms of fire separation, and so forth. And so presumably the existing dwelling was built to building code, and it would continue to be subject to those.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. But on the electrical side, on the heating and ventilation side, I'm presuming that's all coming from the existing housing. So I'm hoping that the bylaws and the enforcement all makes that come up to the new code. And they're not allowed to go back to the old code for that kind of panel and that kind of heating and ventilation.
Mr. Mayor, through you, yes, it would have to meet the current code that's in place. If they are providing the electrical system off of the current electrical supply and not putting in a new panel, then the existing panel would have to be upgraded to meet the current codes. Same with any heating and ventilation systems that might be put in place in the dwelling unit. If they're going to be separately metered and so forth, you would have separate panels and such for those, but that would have to be inspected as well.
Councillor Cora, did you have another?
Yes, one question to the fire chief. So what is the separation between floors then? Is there insulation, or would they have to restructure? Or, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor,
Dr.
through
Flynn?
you. So the fire separation would require what's referred to as fire rating, and it would be a thickness of drywall that has a minimum 2-hour fire rating, so that that allow for people, if there was a fire, that they'd be able to evacuate the building within 2 hours and safely get out. There'd also be other requirements under the building code with respect to, particularly in basement apartments, you need to have adequate window sizes and openings for exiting and so forth. And some of these things can be very expensive, and so not every home is going to be converted or have a second dwelling, because they are expensive to undertake to build under code and to meet code. But that would be the requirement, is that they would be certainly constructed to the current building and fire code requirements.
One final question. So existing right now in our a single dwelling residence, someone can't buy one home, convert the apartment as an apartment and rent the top part. Are they allowed to do that? No.
Mr. Mayor, through you, there are some areas in the town that have zoning permission to do that. For example, in the Rosewood subdivision, when that was approved back in 2014, I believe, the zoning did allow for second dwellings in that subdivision. There have been a couple of other areas that had site-specifically zoning to permit second dwelling units, but it's not throughout the entire town.
Thank you.
Very good. So a question to you, Director of Planning, if I may. The City of St. Catharines, in order to facilitate the one-bedroom apartments, they have allowed street parking. Is that up to the municipality to enforce that? Or if we didn't allow that, would because this is such a strong initiative coming from the Ontario government or from the province, say, would they be able to force us to adopt that bylaw?
Mr. Mayor, through you, the City of St. Catharines in their zoning bylaw do not require on-site parking for a second dwelling unit. So they have exempted the parking requirements. The single detached dwelling is still supposed to have parking for that dwelling unit. So as an alternative, yes, the City of St. Catharines does allow for on-street parking. Most of the residential streets here in Pelham allow for on-street parking. We only have the parking restrictions in place during winter operations. That certainly is very similar to St. Catharines. in the events of storms, winter storms, they do enforce their winter operations and to allow for safe removal of snow. And on-street parking is not allowed during those periods of time, and so that means alternative arrangements have to be made, and you have to find parking, either park in a neighbor's driveway or park in a church parking lot or a plaza or something during that time when the streets are being cleared, and then you're able to come back and park on the street after the storm event has passed.
Thank you. And to facilitate these apartments, the provincial government has recently put forward a change in the Planning Act to do away, I believe the municipality will no longer be able to collect development charges on that apartment. Is that true?
Yes, again, in Bill 108, one of the proposed amendments in Bill 108 is to exempt second dwelling units from development charges. So again, some municipalities currently do that as a form of encouraging second dwelling units, but the province through Bill 108 is going to make that mandatory.
And what would we get? I take it we charge development charges now, and if so, what would that cost be?
Our current bylaw actually does exempt second dwelling units from development charges, and I believe for a one-bedroom apartment, it's in the order of $8,000.
Okay, thank you. So just one comment. When my time at the region, on regional council, you don't realize how big a beast this affordable housing is until you realize that in Niagara Regional Housing, for a family with kids, 2 children, to get affordable housing into cooperative housing, it's a 16-year wait. Okay, like that's ridiculous. It's not. So this affordable housing, it's a beast that I actually I love to see this kind of initiative. It's the more housing, the more rental units we have on the market, it hopefully will drive down the cost of housing, because unfortunately the dream of owning your own home, as we all know, is fast disappearing, and anything we can do to increase rental units, I'm all for it myself. That's my thing for the day. Any other comments on the report? Yes, Councillor Stewart.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Planning, is there anything in there about the tiny homes that are all becoming the rage? Are there any provisions in that to add one of those, like, for example, if you have a big lot?
Mr. Mayor, through you, certainly there is the ability to have a second dwelling in a accessory structure, so it could be within a standalone structure, not necessarily within the dwelling, which then could facilitate one of those prefabricated tiny homes or something similar. And so again, you would have to meet, in our zoning bylaw, we would have a minimum dwelling unit size, and if you comply with that, then you could construct your tiny house.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on the Director of Planning's report? If not, I'll call the vote. All those in favor, so that Committee of the Whole received the Community Planning and Development May 2019 report for information. All those in favor? All those against? Motion carries. Motion put forward by Councillor Hildebrand, 2018 Audited Reserve Year-End Balances. That committee recommend that council receive the 2018 year-end reserve balances report for information. Discussion. Councillor Cork.
Yes, did the treasurer just go through, there's about 3 or 4 slides, and explain to us some of the meanings behind the slides? Like, we talk about reserves, and the first it just, I'm new to this, and I just want to make sure that, you know, we talk about working funds. We had a negative 236,000, and at the end of this year, we had a negative 12,000. Just give us, you know, and if you don't mind, thank you.
No. So through you, Mr. Mayor, what council has is a summary version of what the transactions have been through the reserves. I've got a detailed list in here that actually shows the specific capital projects that were approved by council during the capital budget. So for example, in the reserve for working funds, so that's the reserve that we allocate. So we start off with 236,216, and then there was the surplus of 2018 of 174,624, and then the dividend from Penn West went in there as revenue, and that's where the those were the transactions in that one. If you look at some of the other reserves, like for instance, the ones that have quite a bit of activity, that would be the roads reserves. So, because most of our capital projects are going through the public works, if you look at the roads reserves, you start off with a deficit of 634,332. We transferred from the operating budget $1.6 million, so that was from the operating budget to the capital budget. And then we had all kinds of expenditures that went against that. So for example, a lot of the road projects, traffic signal maintenance, just looking at some culvert replacement programs that we have here, rehabilitation of the roads for 138,000, road-based surface repairs. So all of the roads and vehicle projects that were approved and were finished in 2018, because some of these projects were 16, 17, and 18, went through the reserve. So we have a complete list of all that. So if council wants to see the complete list of the projects going through the reserves, we could send that to you separately if you would like.
Just want to know the information, and are we heading in the right directions about our reserves?
With regards to cash,
Yes.
so this is a report. These are the last reports that we need to present to council in order to complete the December 31st, 2018 fiscal year end. And these are requirements under the Municipal Act. So right now, as of December 31st, we did not have the cash to support the reserves. We are working towards December 31st, 2019, that we will have some of the cash to at least cover the obligatory reserves. So that is the goal for this year, but right now, as of December 31st, 2018, we were in a bank indebtedness and we did not have the cash.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other council trophy?
Yeah, this is a question to the Director of Finance there as well. Under A6, Parks and Recreation, and I'm not sure what it means, so I just want you, deferred revenue, parkland dedication, CA9, for capital detail. So there for the 1,300,000, and then when I go to A9, and it's negative 277. I'm just not sure what that means, if you can help me out.
Okay. So, this is the parkland, the deferred revenue for the parkland dedication.
Yes.
So we start off with a balance of 1.3 million.
Yep.
We had transfers from the operating fund and interest revenue earned because it's an obligatory reserve. Since the town borrowed against the reserve, the town has to allocate interest to the reserve. And so there was $22,000 of interest that went to the reserve. And then there was the repayment of parkland over dedication, so that was a reduction of the deferred revenue, and that's where the $1.3 million came from. So there was in and out. So we have collected, we have started to collect some of the funds. So when we collect money for parkland from the developers, it goes against the parkland dedication account.
When it says through you, Mr. Mayor, when it says CA9,
Okay.
a collection of receivable, I don't know what that means.
So that is the money that's been collected from the developers, so.
Wouldn't that be a negative there, though, that 277? It's in brackets, that's why I'm asking.
Like, that's the capital funds transfer. 3 sheets here. So deferred revenue is a credit balance. So I think these, there's a few sheets on the go here. Capital fund transfers. Okay. Sorry, I've got a few sheets here. I will get back to you on this.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
fine.
I'll just send a message to Counselor.
So to add to that through you, Mr. Mayor, so you're saying there's a balance of $1.3 million in the Parks and Recreation account of December 31st, 2018?
Of deferred revenue, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you get back to that, Counselor, you
Yes.
should obviously.
Yeah,
let
well,
Council.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this report? Okay, if I call the question? So I will call the question. The committee recommend that council receive the 2018 year-end reserve balances report for information. All those in favor? All those against? Motion carries. Motion put forward by Councillor Hahn, 2018 year-end building department report. The committee recommend that council receive the 2018 building department year-end results for information. Any comments from any councillors? Councillor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through the planning director, who in the town accepts subdivisions? And is that a building department function?
Mr. Mayor, through you, council approves the subdivision,
Correct?
and when the town assumes the subdivision and takes on the maintenance, that function of reviewing the subdivision to ensure that all the services have been properly installed, they've gone through their maintenance period. That is done by engineering staff, and they prepare a report and then ultimately a bylaw for council to consider assumption of the subdivision.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So then it's the Public Works Department that accepts the subdivisions?
Yes.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, through the Public Works Director.
But council approves it.
No, I
ultimately,
understand,
okay?
I
Yes.
understand council approves it. I'm concerned about accepting subdivisions where the drainage elevation of the drains are not proper, where the subdivisions are accepted before the streetlights are on. And how are all those elevations and all those things, who verifies that all the elevations and all the drains are at the proper elevation? And the street and the final paving level is the proper elevation? Who in the town is responsible for that?
So, Mr. Mayor, through you, the subdivision agreement specifies the kind of requirements in terms of who does that. The subdivision, there's an engineer who designs the subdivision in terms of the design of where the services go, the grades, the depth of those services, and all of that. The design engineer has to certify that those works have been completed in accordance with their design. We send down TV cameras through water mains and sewers and so forth to do visual inspections, and then, of course, they have inspectors on site when the construction is commencing and to certify that the works are properly installed. So it's the design engineer who's responsible for that, and then our own engineers will, as time permits, do spot inspections during construction, but it's up to the design engineer to give us the certificates of completion and their certificates that the works have been installed in accordance with the approved design. We do, the town engineering department does approve the design.
So then, if Upper Canada Consultants is responsible for that subdivision, it's their design engineer, he's responsible for all the elevations, he's responsible? If
For you, yes, it's the design engineer.
there's a problem, he gets the call?
If there's a problem, we typically get the call.
No, I understand that, but
And then we follow up with them, and before we assume the subdivision, we want to ensure that everything is done in accordance with the design. We certainly don't assume subdivisions where streetlights aren't operating or things like that. That's not what we do. I don't know where that would have happened.
Emily Lane,
We haven't assumed that subdivision yet.
okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Oh, no. Well, wait, let's let the see. Well, go ahead.
Through you,
Councillor Hahn.
Mr. Mayor, just as we're on that topic, a few other questions I have. So Upper Canada Consultants, so they do, how does that work as far as, do we select them, or does the builder select them? It seems to be that I see that name again and again and again. So they do most of our subdivisions, if not all our subdivision planning for Pelham. Does that go to tender? Do they have a contract? Like, what is the relationship with them?
Mr. Mayor, through you, though, the consultants or the developer retains the services of the engineering consultant. And presumably, I mean, I don't speak for every developer out there, but they would go through their own procurement process in terms of hiring consultants. And yes, Upper Canada does do quite a bit of work here in the town. They're well-known, and people do tend to use them.
Is that all? Okay, back to the CAO.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm able to answer the question that Councilor Chofie asked with regards to the parkland dedication. So may I do that now?
Yep.
Okay. So with regards to the repayment of the over-dedication receivable, whenever we receive money from developers for parkland dedication, that gets transferred over to the receivable that we have on the books for the parkland over-dedication. So that draws down that receivable. That's why you'll see an in and an out in that account.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm just gonna, is there will that mean that 1.3 million, is there money available for a park right now?
Yeah, that money is available, yes, but the cash is not there right now. Yeah. But it's earmarked, that's what should be there. So this year, when we replenish some of the cash, when the debentures issue the $4 million, the first thing that is going to replenish are these obligatory reserves. Then the cash will be there at December 31st of 2019. That's the goal, is to start to replenish all these. It'll be there then.
Yeah, and through you, Mr. Mayor, so then, December 2019, we would have some extra cash, and we can take care of that park in Lookout?
Yes,
That's what I was getting at with
Yes.
the money.
yes,
Yep.
okay.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll call a question. The committee recommend that council receive the 2018 Building Department year-end results for information. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Motion put forward by Councillor Corr, Strategic Asset Management Policy. That the Committee of the Whole receive the staff report entitled Council Policy strategic asset management policy, and that committee recommend that council approve the policy at their next regular meeting. Questions on this report? Not seeing any. And I will read it one more time, that the Committee of the Whole receive the staff report entitled Council Policy, Strategic Asset Management Policy, and that committee recommend that council approve the policy at their next regular meeting. All those in favor? And all those opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Corporate Services Monthly Report. That Committee of the Whole receive the Corporate Services May 2019 Report for information. Any discussion on this report, Council? Councilor Hildebrand.
Yes. I have several comments, but I'll start with only one.
Okay.
The rest of the councilors. With regards to the IT projects, there's an item on there called EHM Software Inquiry to create real-time dashboard to show power consumption and usage at the MCC. What that relates to is the hydro usage. Right now, for the last few weeks, we've been receiving daily updates of our hydro usage, but it's about a day late. But what we want to do is provide a dashboard for the staff so that they can view, virtually like driving your car, they can see exactly how many kilowatts are using, what happens when we turn things on and turn things off.
And that would show up on the computers, Councilor?
Yes, it's a dashboard showing up right on the computer. The programmer from EHM Software showed us how hospitals are using the dashboard to monitor their power consumption. And it's vital that the staff get instant results to know what's happening when they turn things on and turns, because we're monitored by the peak usage. And peak usage is the thing we're trying to control. It's not when everything's running flat, it's when we turn things on. So we have to analyze how we turn things on, the procedures we have relating to that.
Excellent. Very good. And how is that project coming along?
It's working very well, because we're gonna come to the MCC report, and we got several areas in that staff has done an excellent job in reducing our power consumption, which is the highest usage. We've come down from a high of the 667 in September of peak demand kilowatts, and March we were down to 500, and in April, when we dropped down to one rink, we were down to 368 kilowatts, which is a marvelous thing for staff to accomplish.
Excellent.
And I must commend the staff and all the hard work they've done in coming up with that. And I truly believe that we're going to be able to reduce our peaks further. And we have further calls to make with and meetings with Ontario Hydro, plus our vendors, trying to get the engineering information we need to properly analyze our equipment and how it's operating.
Well, in between you and staff working together, that's council, I'll give you guys a big thank you.
Thank you.
Any other Councilor Hildebrand, do you have any other comments, or?
No, I just think it's great to be able to save that amount of money on hydro.
Yes, you got that right. I think we all agree with you.
And we're hoping it translates not only over from the MCC, but it translates into other areas of the town. And also, eventually, we're hoping we can save the residents some money on hydro rates as well.
Okay. Well, we'll keep you posted then on this.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other, Council Trophy?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, and we're looking at the arena revenues, multi-purpose space revenues, the gymnasium, the grants and other revenues. We're right on target to be the only one that we can use a little help on is the programming revenues, which is a little low. It's budgeted at $114,800 for the year, and we're only at about 11%, 12,229. But everything else, we're right on target, if not over. So,
And perhaps the director would wish to comment on that.
Yeah, just so that I can comment on that, You'll see in our cow report that we're just taking registrations for summer programming.
Okay.
And then during the summer, you will see that jump up.
Okay, and then through you, Mr. Mayor, sorry, then there's only one I just want an explanation on. It's just there's a budget of $500 for furniture and equipment, and we're at $9,192. I just wasn't sure what that was.
To the director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's actually, what we've done is, we no longer have our cleaning contract. So we needed to
All the
purchase
equipment for-
2 of the,
Yeah,
cleaners.
yeah, you're right.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we're on the corporate service monthly report, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I think we crossed over, but the question I'm going to ask is that we received $13,838 from the Ontario Cannabis Legalization Information or funding. Where is that money going to? I know right now it's under the bylaw, total fire and bylaw services. Am I right? Yes. Yes, it's under the fire and bylaw services. We budget for 14,300. We have 21,000. So is that money going to stay in that department? Or are we going to be using it to, for other purposes?
Fire chief, oh, Barb, oh, I'm sorry, Director of Planning?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that was money that we received from the provincial government. You will recall back in, when cannabis was legalized, they indicated that there would be funding that they would make available to municipalities. There was 2 payments. They totaled some $13,000 for Pelham, and that is money that is supposed to be targeted towards cannabis related enforcement, education with respect to cannabis bylaws and so forth.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we're going to use some of that money to implement or to get the bylaws going. I know we said earlier that you were overwhelmed and you needed extra help. Was there a possibility of hiring somebody with that $13,000 so we could get this?
Mr. Mayor, through you, that it has to go towards specific things, and it's primarily related to enforcement and
enforcement, okay.
education. So once the bylaws are in place, then that's funding that we can use, whether we need to buy equipment to monitor odor or other things, then that's what that money could be earmarked towards.
Thank you. Councilor Hibbleman.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this is a question for the recreational director. The Councilor Corr mentioned a while ago with regard to rental of space in the MCC. We noticed that there's some offices available. Has any more work been done in that rental of that space?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have a couple of irons in the pot. Right now, we're working with Brock University with regard to programming. We're just waiting for some answers to come back. If that doesn't pan out like we think it will, we will be using it for a rental space of a boardroom as well, possibilities. Probably next month, I can update, you as where we're at.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And perhaps the director could also put those irons in the fire, perhaps, and take them out of the pot. Okay.
Cannabis.
So that, if there are no other questions, the Committee of the Whole received the Corporate Services May 2019 report for information. All those in favor? All those against? That motion carries. Motion put forward by Councillor Stewart, Fire and Bylaw Services Monthly Report. The Committee of the Whole received the Fire and Bylaw Services May 2019 report for information. Any comment on this report? Okay, not seeing any. The Committee of the Whole received the Fire and Bylaw Services May 2019 report for information. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion carries. And motion put forward by Councilor Wink. Niagara Adapts Partnership with Brock University. That committee recommends that council receive the report entitled Niagara Adapts Partnership with Brock University for information purposes. Any questions on this report? I'm not seeing any. Read it one more
No,
time.
just
Oh,
one-
sorry, okay, Councilor
Is
Court.
this costing us any money? I'm sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is a fee that is being charged by the municipalities that are joining in this initiative. It is to help fund part of the research that Brock is doing. It is $10,000 per year that you're involved with the program, and it's a 2-year program, and that funds will be funded from an engineering account that was already approved through the 2019 operating budget. So there's no more additional funds asked to proceed with this program. It's being funded through the 2019 operating budget that's already been approved by council.
Thank you.
And the purpose, through you, Mr. Mayor, I thought we hired a climate control person, and now we're gonna add another person to help.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, that's not the case. We have hired a climate change coordinator who's looking after our adaptive planning process and with respect to climate change. This is an actual program that was, when all the funding was announced for climate change coordinator positions, and this was actually instigated by Brock University. So they're come forward with a program. They're developing research programs, and they're involving the municipalities that have brought up this climate change coordinator into play. They're also approaching other municipalities. Right now, I believe we have 3 municipalities that are signed on to join in, but we're hoping to get more within the region. So the idea is to share resources and to share the experiences and expertise that Brock University has to offer. And share the municipalities that are going to be involved with this. Will be working towards leveraging Brock's research and insight and experience in this on developing our adaptive plan and process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I can add, Director, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Brock has been running their own climate program for, I believe it's 18 years now, is it not? So they've got a lot of research started, and they seem to have a lot of expertise in the field.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to you. That's correct. They have been doing this for some time now. Brock University, as well as the municipalities that are on board with this, are very excited about the opportunity to work with Brock on this venture.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the Niagara Adapts Partnership? That committee recommend, excuse me. The committee recommend that council receive the report entitled Niagara Adapts Partnership with Brock University for information purposes. All those in favor? And any opposed? Motion carries. Budget need additional funding for hydrological studies for the Foss Road sanitary sewer replacement. That committee recommend that council receive the report entitled Additional Funding for Hydrogeological Studies. Budget needs, Foss Road sanitary sewer replacement, and that council approve the additional funds required to fund the additional costs associated with the sanitary sewer design and replacement project from the wastewater reserve. Comments on this? Councilor Chofie.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. So this went out with an RFP, and then they come back and they figure they need an additional $45,000 plus taxes in order, because of the sandy soil conditions? Is that the reason behind it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Correct. The original RFP assignment was for the detailed design. It included an initial investigation. They've determined through that initial investigation that indeed there is the need to carry on with further hydrological assessments, and that's what these additional fees were for. They weren't included in the original budget for the design work. That's correct.
Thank you.
So you, through you, Mr. Mayor, so then that was included in the original RFP. There could be further costs if required, or they just discover it. Is it something that they would know ahead of time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, this would be something that we would not know at the time. This is kind of particular, or it's seen in other forms of the business as well. One is similar to an archaeological dig. You would not go through an RFP and have them evaluate. There's different stages of archaeological process. With any RFP I've been involved with respect to that, and similar to the hydrological studies, you do the initial studies up front. You have the consultant do the initial groundwork as part of their base fee. And then if there's additional works, best practice would be to provide some type of provisional item for that moving forward. We just released a Church Street design, a sanitary sewer design RFP. In that RFP, we're allowing a provisional item to cover the cost of further hydrological studies if required. But in this case, we would do the initial assessment, and we didn't have it budgeted in the original budget to do the detailed investigation and studies for the hydrological work and the environmental impact study. So that's why we have to come and ask for additional funds now to move forward with that project. Again, as with Church, we've allowed for a provisional item in that RFP that will account for the cost to carry this out if we indeed need to on that project as well.
Thank you. Well, Councilor Chofie, you want to finish your thoughts?
Just one last one through you, Mr. Mayor. So we would have to, would there be any additional, would the additional 50,000 be in the budget somewhere that you can find, or we got to approve an additional 50,000?
Perhaps the treasurer?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it's coming through a reserve transfer. That's where it's coming from. I think ultimately, this is part of the wastewater budget. As you know, it is separately funded through the charging of the fees, the usage of the water. So whatever surplus we have in year for the wastewater, it goes directly into the reserve, and that should offset this increase.
Thank you.
Councilor Court?
No, that answered my question, where the money was coming from.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the budget need? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? Motion carries. Motion put forward by Councillor Hahn, Public Works Monthly Report. That Committee of the Whole receive the Public Works and Utilities May 2019 report for information. Any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Hahn.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a question with regards to beautification. So how does it work when there is a property that's vacant? So it's, I don't know, it's in a subdivision, a builder owns it, hasn't built, or somebody's vacated the premises when it comes to weeds and trees and things like that that haven't been maintained. Do we contact the owners and give them a certain amount of time to remedy the situation? If they don't, then we do it and bill them, or what is the situation with regards to beautification and how that works?
Perhaps bylaw for your chief, please.
Through Mr. Mayor, yeah, that falls under our department. Yeah, so it's a common thing, people call, the weeds are over 8 inches and so forth. We issue them a letter, we contact them, issue them a letter, we give them a certain amount of time. If they don't do it, we send a company out and we bill them for it.
What's that certain amount of time?
Depends on the lot or just the size of the property. One particular lot just on Canberra Road, which is a single building lot, we give them a week. If they don't get it done, we'll do it for them. They actually cut it today. But there's a couple properties around where there's 2-3 acres. They have to get a heavier equipment in to do it, so we maybe give them 2 weeks to do it. So we're pretty tight on it. We stay on it.
Something over there.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through the Director of Public Works, looking at the public service requests, one of the issues that my residents still seem to have is filling out the PSR system. And I know at the strategic plan, we talked about upgrading it. Do you know where we stand with regards to the PSR system?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the manager of IT, Mike, is looking at that. He is currently working with Marmac. Marmac is the company that's doing our capital asset management plan. And so we're looking at updating the PSR system and tying it into the work order system. So I can provide a more detailed update to the council around.
Thank you.
Okay. And I would like to direct a question to Director of Public Works. And that is the condition of, Maple Street between 16 and I believe it's which goes all the way maybe to Sawmill perhaps, I guess. It's just in there. And that deterioration was caused, of course, when they closed down Victoria Avenue and they put traffic down that road for half a day. And to say the least, it's kind of rough. I see we have pylons there. I know it wasn't in the budget. Is there anything we can do about that, or what's your comment on that? And I'm sorry I didn't give you a heads up on this.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Maple Street, actually, that section of road is going to be part of the resurfacing contract this year.
Oh.
That as well as Roland Road that comes off of Maple Street. So that road is slated to be part of the 2019 surface treatment program.
Oh, excellent. So, excellent. Thank you for that. Great. Council here with
I'm not sure whether this falls into this category, but I know it applies to Public Works. With regards to gypsy moth spraying, I would recommend that staff prepare a report on how we may establish a policy for gypsy moth spraying for next year.
Well, hopefully we won't be doing it next year, but that's probably, in light of continued questions, probably a good recommendation. Perhaps we'll talk to, I believe it fell under Public Works. Any comments on that direction?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, yes, staff can look at developing a policy. We can work with other municipalities to see what they're doing, as well as work with our consultants that have been in this business for some time. It's a very tricky issue as well, because the infestation level depends a lot on the climate, as well as the life cycle of the moth. So fingers crossed, we're actually anticipating that the gypsy moth population will decline in 2020. However, that's not known, so obviously, staff, we can come back with a report with a proposed policy on how we address the gypsy moth issue, and council may want to consider that it be some type of policy that would apply to a general types of infestation and nuisances that would be across the town, not necessarily just the gypsy moth, but we could look at establishing some type of reserve fund that would be able to be used to fund other types of infestations and nuisances around the town as well.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that would be excellent, because the way we've been running around the last little while about gypsy moths, I'm sure all of us, and especially the mayor, who's the gypsy moth king, would make life a lot easier for all of us, including yourself.
I'd be happy never to see a gypsy moth again.
So if I can add to that, in my discussions with Niagara Parks Commission, I believe the gentleman's name was Dino, he did recommend that, or he did state that they use a Ministry of Natural Resources mapping that is done, I believe it's late fall. They actually heat map the province, and that heat map shows the likelihood of next year's gypsy moth infestations. So maybe if we can make inquiries about that, and maybe that would give us a heads up on what steps we would have to take in the coming months. Great, thank you. Any, Lisa, Councillor Hahn?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Director of Public Works, with regards to trees, seeing as we're on the topic of gypsy moth, you're gonna not maybe see them, but you'll hear more about it. Oak trees. So we are replacing, or we're putting in oak trees still, I think, new subdivisions. I'm hoping that's gonna change soon, seeing as that's the caviar for gypsy moth. So can we ensure that new subdivisions aren't gonna have oak trees put in? Because that doesn't really make a lot of sense at this juncture.
Yeah, Director of Planning?
Mr. Mayor, through you, I know we do have a list of tree species that are preferred trees for planting in along the street trees and subdivisions. They generally are kind of species of trees that are native to the area. Oak is one of them, but we can take a look at that list, and you know, it's also I think the percentage of oak in one area versus introduction of other species and having that diversity, so it's not just all one tree type.
I think that makes sense to look at the list because it's oak, and then I'm sure there's other, types of trees that are kind of preference or preferred trees for whether it's gypsy moth or the ash borer or whatever it is. Like, look at the kind of and the fellow that was here earlier, we've got some invasive creatures, and then what kind of trees we're putting in. Those two should sync up so that we're not putting in the more things that are going to cause problems further down and cost us more money in spraying. So we can look at that. Also, too, on the topic of trees, so when they die, so even not far from where I live, they're very young. They're 2-year-old oak trees, and at least 3 of them, I would say, are dead because of the caterpillar. Do we call in contractors then, or do we do this work ourselves, or what does that look like when it comes to trees that are on the boulevard that are dead? Like, how does that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do have our own staff that are able to take care of the smaller types of trees, and then we contract out to a contractor to take care of removal of larger types of trees.
So it's
that we're not
based
able to undertake.
strictly on size then?
Boulevard trees, smaller boulevard trees, we would do that ourselves.
And so when we put new trees in, again, we would do that ourselves as well?
Correct.
Okay, thanks. Gonna say something?
Well, Mr. Mayor, through you, just in new subdivisions, they are done by the developer. The street trees, we don't put those in, the developer puts them in, and again, they're on a maintenance period for at least a year. And if they die within that year, then it's the developer's responsibility to replace them. And again, that's something that we check prior to assuming the subdivision to ensure that there are, the street trees are appropriately planted. So in new developments, it's not the town that's doing it, it is the developer.
So further that through, Mr. Mayor, what does that process look like? So in the case that I just mentioned, you've got a 2-year-old subdivision with oak trees, and there are some dead ones. So it's within a couple years, I guess. So the resident then, because they're calling me, so that I need to have an answer. So do I suggest that they call the developer, who's going to basically never get back to them and do nothing, or call the town, or what happens?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, through you, I would suggest that they do call the town, and then we would follow up with the developer in terms of replacing that street tree. You know, we hold securities, so if they don't do it and we have the securities, then we would go in and do it and draw down on their securities.
So long as the subdivision hasn't been assumed, it would
Correct.
still be under the developer?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. So we have a note passed to me from the clerk. Can I have a motion for the staff direction for invasive species policy? So, Councilor Hildebrand?
I'll make that motion.
Okay. And, wait, okay, then we need, is there a seconder? Okay, Lisa?
You don't need a second.
Oh, don't need a second because it's a resolution, I'm sorry. So we should debate that, should we not? Yeah. So, yeah, let's talk about this. What are we hoping to accomplish, Madame Clerk?
Mr. Mayor,
Oh, I'm sorry.
is this related to what I had mentioned earlier? So if we're matching the tree species up with the invasive species, is this what you're referring to?
Oh, did this come from Bob? Oh, I'm sorry. Counselor?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to establish a policy. Obviously, I was talking about gypsy moths, but I agree with Public Works Director that we should include all the invasive species in, because I wanted to have a policy prepared so that no matter what we're facing in the following years, that we don't have to go through all the details we're going through now with gypsy moths.
It'd be quite a far-reaching policy, perhaps. I
Through you,
don't know.
Mr. Mayor, I'm assuming that other communities have a policy like this, and that we can just pick one up. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah?
Well, Niagara Parks might have one.
Yes, indeed, yeah. Okay, yeah, okay, so we do have a seconder. Right? Do you second it? Yeah.
We don't need a seconder,
Oh, yeah, we're on committee. Yeah, I keep forgetting that. Council Lee, did you have, no? No, okay. Any other discussion on this direction? Okay, so we do vote on it, though. Yeah.
Yes, the procedural bylaw does ask that staff directions be through a motion, so that I know it's not just a comment, but it's actually a council
Yes.
direction.
Okay, so we do have that direction now.
I need to have a vote on it.
Oh, okay, so all in favor of this, to make a staff direction to form an invasive species policy? All those in favor? Okay, all those opposed? So that motion carries.
I
Excellent.
have it here.
Okay, so that was good. Okay, the committee of the whole received the Public Works and Utilities.
I got
Oh,
one
I'm sorry,
question.
sorry, Counselor.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the CEO, I thought we were gonna have a detailed cost of transit. I still see a number of people riding the transit, but I don't see a cost. And I would like to see what it costs per month, if you don't mind.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, staff are working on that. I apologize, I plan to have it for this report. We're also still trying to finalize the amounts of the grants, so my goal is to, in the coming report, is to show month by month what the cost per ridership would be, per rider, which would include all the fixed revenues, variable revenues, fixed costs, and then the variable costs as well. That is in the
Thank
works,
you.
it is coming.
Great.
We just recently transferred the transit portfolio over to Public Works, and I'm sure that Jason is enjoying the extra work that transit is giving him, hence perhaps the tardiness of the report. Thank you, Director, for working on that. Thanks. Any other questions? No. Okay. The Committee of the Whole received the Public Works and Utilities May 2019 report for information. All those in favor? All those against? Motion carries. Motion put forward by Councilor Corr. Recreation, Culture, and Wellness Monthly Report. That committee of the Whole received the Recreation, Culture, and Wellness May 2019 report for information. Discussion from council. Councilor Stewart.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, item number 7, the Love My Hood. It has 4 events listed. Can you tell me when those were booked? Were they booked last year or this year? Because this has come up before, and I'm pretty sure that council decided that we would do the ones that were already booked but not do more.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, all of these were booked early. Kinsman, Timber Creek, and Abbott were booked last year for this year, and Chandler was booked early spring.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hahn?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, item number 3, Wheelan Heights and Lookout Park update. I think most of us received an email recently that suggested that there was some different price points that we could be looking at. Just wondering if that was received by the director and if we're looking into that or not, as far as the supplier being a totally different pricing scheme.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we will be meeting with Benstock over the next couple of days. It'll probably be the beginning of next week as well. I did receive a couple of emails. I know the one that you're particularly, but there are others. And we will be investigating and we will get back to council.
And if I may ask, they haven't started yet on the preparing of the park?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's initially what we will be discussing as dates that they will be going in.
Okay. Yep, thank you.
We'll keep council informed.
Yep, thank you. Any other discussion on this report, council? Not seeing any, if I may. The Committee of the Whole received the Recreation, Culture, and Wellness May 2019 report for information. All those in favor? And any opposed? Motion carries. Motion put forward by Councilor Trophy, Town of Pelham Communications Plan 2019 to 2022. The Committee of the Whole received the Town of Pelham Communications Plan 2019-2022 report, and that committee recommend that council adopt the plan, which is an important tool to implement the town's strategic plan. Comments? Questions on this plan? Councilor Trophy.
Yeah, just in the media plan, we come out with that Pelham magazine twice a year. And I was just hoping that for the fall one, that we can just include a little bit more information. And I was looking at some other ones that are around the communities here, like with schedules and stuff that's going on in our arenas and parks and things like that, Christmas stuff. We can add just that little burbs. I'm not sure if we can do that, if that's something that we can look at, please. Or maybe the rest of council doesn't agree, it's fine.
Yep. Thanks, Councilor.
I have a sample one from City of Welland that I received, which actually looks pretty good. It's a good advertising tool, actually, to fill up our arena.
Okay.
We can.
Maybe pass it along to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we have been reviewing the guide, and this is the initial relaunch of the guide. We will be including a robust schedule of programming, and
Okay.
that is already in the works for the fall edition.
Good.
So thank you.
Councilor Hahn?
go ahead.
Oh, Councilor Stewart then.
Further to that, I would request, as we did the last time, that council gets a chance to review the guide before it goes to print.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will do my absolute best to make that happen. With these guides, we're often under tight deadlines, and revisions are going back as they were in the spring right up until the 11th hour. So I will do my absolute best. I did send an email out to council earlier this week or late last week, I can't quite remember when, asking for feedback or input on the content of the guide, and as far as kind of the general look and layout. And if council had any suggestions or ideas, I'm happy to incorporate those to kind of get that ball rolling. But certainly as the process moves along and sample pages are available, I can pass those on to council.
Thank you.
Councilor Hahn.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, further to that, actually, I'd like to see it as Councilor Trophy mentioned too, as really a reference guide, something that somebody will retain. It's in the coffee table, it's in their drawer. It's not just a quick read and toss. So that it will have program information, but also too useful information about for instance, emergency information, and the chief will like this. So things perhaps like, you know, whether it's CPR information or choking, or things like emergency numbers, who to call, utility numbers, after hours, you got a leak, you know, there's water running, whatever the issue is, like, at least a reference tool so somebody knows what to do, you know, in an emergency. Also to perhaps some information about emergency car care kit, because it's winter time, right? So you've got icy roads, things like just an emergency kit for your home, what you should have, what it contains, you know, to sustain for so many hours, that kind of thing. So useful information that people can look at and maybe learn something at the same time, that these are the things you should have in your house. So the power goes out for an extended period of time. You know, what do you do? What do you need to have? That kind of thing. So maybe incorporating some of that information as well.
Through Mr. Mayor, we do have a 72-hour emergency booklet that is coordinated through the chief and the fire department. One of the planned pieces of content for this guide is kind of around Fire Prevention Week, but also some of exactly what you're talking about, you know, being prepared in emergency, and certainly providing people not to you know, duplicate efforts, but to let them know where they can get this emergency guide and refer to it. So certainly between those two pieces, we can try and get as much information out as possible about that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, is there any plan to have this document be an interactive document online?
Through Mr. Mayor, so it is currently online, so we do have a copy of it online. All of the, it's basically kind of a flip PDF, so as you go through it, it flips the pages just as if you're reading it in your hands. I can work on, I'm not sure if the program that's uploaded through will carry through the links in the PDF so that you can click directly on it, but I can find out as we put it together this go around.
That would be good. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Stewart?
Yeah, I found that the communications plan is excessively huge, 16 pages with a lot of pictures, and pretty much everything that's in there was covered in the strategic plan itself. And on page 5 in here is pretty much lays out the whole plan. A comment. It just seems like overkill.
Any comment on that, either through the clerk or through the communications, or?
Yep, I'm happy to provide. In researching other municipality communications plan, ours falls generally within the same content, same length. Some are maybe a few pages shorter, some are even longer. I think if we just say something like relevant, people may not understand what it is that we're talking about. Plan kind of goes through.
But it says so, right under the word relevant.
I think the plan kind of goes through how we will make our information relevant and in what ways we're going to make it relevant. It also touches upon some of the key themes that I've seen and have asked residents for in the last few years about how we're communicating with them and how we can maybe do a better job in certain areas. And so those 3 themes are expanded upon. It also talks a little bit more about development of a crisis communications plan, how we incorporate media and public relations and things of that nature. So I think it does fall in line with the length or breadth of other municipality communications plans.
Councilor Hahn?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, actually further to that crisis communications plan, who will be building that?
That's something that I will get started on and working on that. So it's not, so when we think of crisis communications, it's not necessarily emergency. Crisis communications is, in this regard, is more of, you know, if the brand takes a hit or our reputation takes a hit, it's how do we manage those instances where, you know, we kind of have to act quickly and kind of get a message out or a directive out. So I'll be working on that, and it'll go through SMT and then, of course, through the council as well.
Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. That committee recommend that council adopt the plan, which is an important tool to implement the town's strategic plan. All those in favor? All those against? Motion goes. Proposed update to council report template. Oh, sorry, but put forward by Councilor Stewart. The Committee of the Whole received the update to council report template information, and that committee recommend to council that the 2019 council report template be approved and implemented for all council reports beginning June 17th, 2019. Perhaps, would you like to comment on that? Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like to comment just on the redesign of it?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. As it's noted in the report introducing the new template, we, as a senior management team, have been noticing trends in what council is looking for, and would like to propose this new template to include things such as financial considerations, legal consultation, consultation with other members of staff, so that it's noted directly on the template. And because we use an electronic agenda system, your reports aren't signed with the traditional signature. However, they are signed through the electronic agenda approvals process. So that is reflected on this template as well. We are also trying, just for ease in tracking all of the reports, to initiate a report numbering system, which eScribe is presently working on. I hope to have everything ready for everyone to be able to use for the June 17th meeting. However, we may have to roll that in throughout the summer if eScribe can't get everything updated for me, but we will do our best to get it for June.
So, thank you. On that background, any discussion? Councilor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the comments that the clerk has made, and I truly do appreciate this new template. I think it's excellent.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else? Okay. So I'd also like to remind everyone here tonight that because we passed the policy, what's the word I'm looking for?
The procedural bylaw, Mr.
That's
Mayor.
it, the procedural bylaw, during our regular council meeting beforehand. Our next meeting and all meetings therefrom will be starting at 5:30 from now on. So just mark that on your calendar.
Except for next week.
No. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, the planning meeting that is scheduled for June the 10th is still scheduled for 6:30 because notice was provided prior to final enactment of the procedural bylaw. So June the 10th, planning meeting will be at 6:30. June the 17th, council meeting will begin at 5:30.
I think that's what I said.
Very close to what you said.
Okay, so next Monday is June, is 6:30. The next council meeting at June 17th is at 5:30. Thank you for clarifying that. Proposed update to, did I just do this one?
You just haven't called the question yet.
Oh, I haven't called the question, I'm sorry. So the committee recommend to council that the 2019 council report template be approved and implemented for all council reports beginning June 17th, 2019. All those in favor? And all those opposed? Motion carries. And motion put forward by Councilor Wink, Clerk's Department monthly report. The Committee of the Whole received the Clerk's Department May 2019 report for information. Any questions or comments on this report, Council? I will call the question. The Committee of the Whole received the Clerk's Department 2019 report for information. All those in favor? you. All those opposed? Great. Motion put forward by Councillor Hildebrand. Oh, adjournment.
Yeah.
Before we say that, before we do the adjournment, I've got to say something that we haven't, I've been meaning to say, point out to council for the last 5 or 6 meetings, because we get comments from people who are watching the film, and it's, when we vote as a council, will you please raise your hands? The request from the public is, I know it's, especially this time of night, because I do it myself when I was a councilor, just a flick of the wrist. But the comments we have got from people who are watching this, it would be nice if when we vote, please put your hand up in the air and please vote. Thank you very much for your consideration on this matter. Now, adjournment. That this regular meeting of committees.
Some new business.
Thank you, council.
Excuse
Oh,
me.
you guys got questions?
Yeah.
Councilor Hahn.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
To you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know if you wanted to speak to the councillors in regards to the reports, so the opportunity for them to do their
And
reports.
thank you for that reminder, Counselor. Yes, so another problematic, it's just an irritant, not even an irritant, it's just something that we haven't been doing on this council that we should be doing, and that is we have taken the time to set up various committees. And so various counselors are in various committees, and you are this councilor's, this council's eyes and ears when you sit on that committee. And it would be great if said counselors on different committees, doesn't have to be a 2-minute report, or a 1-minute report even, just to tell us how the committee's going, how the residents are acting, or reacting to the committee, any ideas they may be bringing forward. It would be great if we started to have some committee council reports on these committees. Thank you for bringing that, and perhaps a comment on that?
Further to that, you may want to let the councillors know times as far as getting information to our clerk.
I'll let the clerk address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Now with the new procedural bylaw, if the meeting, for example, is June 17th, the clerk would need the report from the councillor 8 business days prior. So it would be this Wednesday at noon for the 17th of June.
Thank you for that. Excellent. So then, instead of me boring you with my reports, you can also inform council on the committee reports. Councillor.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the question I have is how is this report going to be any different than the minutes from the meeting?
Well, the minutes, I just, as the mayor, and I think I speak for everyone on council, the minutes are great, but I still would like to see, I would still like to hear a verbal report. Minutes are great, and you read them, and you don't really get a feel of what's going on, and I think we would like to have a council report.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, are you then wanting an additional written report from the counselor as opposed to just speaking to those committee minutes?
Whatever, I think that, I'll leave that up to the discussion of the council. If you would just want to follow the minutes or make your report to the minutes, or perhaps the clerk has a suggestion. I think that either way would, even if you just wanted to put your own comments other than the minutes, or what do you recommend, Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the minutes always come to council on the council agenda for information purposes. If members wanted to highlight maybe an upcoming event or something of importance that way, it could be done in a few different ways. If it's an important event, something new to announce, you could give the clerk a report to include on the agenda. That would be a written report. If it's something that's just referencing the minutes, that could be done through a comment on the consent agenda. Just as a reminder to members of council procedurally, if you're just commenting on a consent agenda item, you don't have to lift it for separate consideration. You only lift it if you're changing the recommendation. So if you had something extra you wanted to add to the minutes, some background, that could be done at the consent agenda. Also, if you wanted only to provide a verbal update on a committee that may have happened since the last council meeting, but not in time for the deadline, you could ask during the agenda approval stage to add a verbal report under councillor reports. So there's a couple of different options available. If anybody has any questions, just pop me an email and I'll be happy to help.
Yeah, since we're on this subject, I'm going to give you just a quick report in regards to the MCC user or hospitality group. Starting this Wednesday at 9 p.m., there will be a Toronto Raptors viewing party in Gary Kersey room. Am I correct? So, and that'll be going on. She's got it right to Game 7, but I believe it'll be over Game 6. Raptors in 6.
Thank you.
Anybody out there? Wednesday night, 9 p.m., drinks and food will be available. Come support the Raptors in your Raptor gear.
Thank you for that, Counselor. That's fine. So any questions? Just like I say, we're not wanting a detailed 5-minute monologue, just something to tell us how the committee's going. And then like as the clerk suggested, any upcoming events or just let us know what's happening out there. That's all. Doesn't have, like I say, 1 minute, 2 minutes, it'd be great. Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Oh, no, I guess we're ready to do the adjournment. I don't see any hands held high. That this regular meeting of committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for June 17th, 2019, following council. All those in favor? Thank you, thank you. There's lots of clowns on this, I don't know.